September the 15th. Looking to the agenda, are there changes, additions?
Nothing from administration, Mayor Borman.
Great, in which case I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we have one delegation joining us today, the Bow Valley SPCA, to give the year-to-date activity report. And welcome to Lisa McDowell.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. So we're excited to present to you. I'm here with my fellow director, Ed Mrozek, who's also our treasurer and head of operations. We like to wear many hats at the Bow Valley SPCA. So we're just going to talk to you today about the stuff we've been up to over the past year and a half and how we're sort of living and delivering our mission in Canmore and the Bow Valley. And I'm not sure if we've presented to this council before, so just quickly, 10 minutes is going to run, and I promise Cheryl I'd keep on time. Our mission is to provide our community with an adoption center based on a no cage, no kill philosophy with two objectives. Of course, to shelter, care for, and rehome stray and abandoned cats and dogs, but also equally important is to use towards animals and responsible pet ownership and companionship. And so that's how we're going to sort of talk about things today. So I'm going to hand it over to Ed to talk about what we've been doing at the Carla Cummings Junkie Adoption Center, and then I will pick it up and talk about the people side of what we do.
Okay, just to give you an overview of the type of activity that we see here. Last year in 2019, we adopted out 150 animals, and that's approximately a 50% increase over 2018. And in all of last year, we accepted 16 surrendered dogs and cats from the local area. This year, for the first half of the year, and you would have thought that with COVID, there'd be decreased activity, but in fact, we've seen increased activity. For the first half of the year, we've actually adopted out 83 dogs and cats. And for the first 6 months, accepted 13 surrenders from dogs and cats from local residents. When COVID hit full bore, we started a foster program as well for the dogs and cats that we were had in our care. And the residents in the Canmore area stepped forward, and we ended up fostering 5 dogs and 5 cats in our area. So the residents of Canmore have really helped participate despite COVID. As far as the staffing goes in our area, because we have to have animal care attendants there in the morning and afternoon, we continue to keep the staff of approximately 10 animal care attendants for the year. We have a center manager, which is still employed, and we had an administrator position, which was a part-time position. That position is no longer with us. However, it was a result of that individual pursuing other areas of other endeavors, and so due to some of the funding requirements that we had, we decided that we would not continue with that position. Again, in 2020, with the increased number of animals that we take in, we continue to work with other rescue organizations within Alberta, including Cochrane and Calgary.
And I'm just trying to, I've got too many screens going here to figure out how to advance my PowerPoint. There we go. So yeah, so that does bring up our total. So we have been open, the center's been open since 2007. So we always like to show our, year-to-date numbers on how many animals we've been able to rehome to the community and surrounding areas. So just under 1,200 cats and just under 600 dogs. So for a center of our size, we think that's pretty amazing. So I wanted to spend some of our time here just talking about what we're doing outside of our walls and who we're bringing into our walls beyond just our animals, which we always love to talk about, but we don't talk about this side of things too much. So the Bow Valley SPCA is committed to the community, and I think we're reflective of the community in which we operate. One of the things we run, and we've been running this since we've been open, is a spay and neuter assistance program. So this is really a way for us to allow eligible pet owners access to a low-cost spay and neuter for their pets. That the cost of the spay and neuter isn't a barrier to responsible pet ownership. And we follow the same guidelines as the Town of Canmore for its accessibility programs. So 2019, we were able to help 10 pet owners through the program. Year to date in 2020, we've had 6 people come through the program. And I'd say those numbers are fairly typical. We usually see about 15 people. I don't know, Ed, if you have better numbers, but I think we're typically around 15 people accessing the program. And then we've really focused on really trying to get outside of our center in the past few years. And I think we've done a really great job over 2019. And certainly we're well on our way until March of 2020. So we're trying to interact with all age groups in the community, from children up to seniors, and obviously their pets where we can do that too. So and hopefully I am actually sharing my screen. I feel like I'm sharing my screen, but I can't, I don't know. So in 2019, in the first part, we'll talk the first quarter of 2020, we'll talk about, we were able to go into a number of the Canmore schools. And so that's our adoption center manager, Megan, and her dog Zeus visiting one of the classrooms. And we've also had student classrooms come into the center so that they can see the reality of what, you know, an adoption center is like and what rescue animals are like. And we gear our presentations to, you know, the age, and also work with the teachers on something that's curriculum appropriate when we're going and speaking with students. And of course, we have so many children visitors to the center all the time because we offer cat cuddling. And so that's always very popular. And we sometimes even have birthday parties come into the center, and we use every opportunity we can to make it an educational moment. So even if you come for a birthday party, you get a bit of a talk on whether it's responsible pet ownership or humane treatment of animals and things like that. So we've also really started to develop some regular visits with seniors in the community. So 2019 in particular, and then up to March, we had regular visits at the Morningstar House, which is the memory care ward at Origins. We also were visiting at Golden Eagle View Terrace, and of course, Bow River Seniors Lodge. And some of those are simply companionship visits where it's our volunteers going with either our current resident animals, it could be their animal who was a former resident of the adoption center, or it could be I've gone with my own dog even to visit. And those are just fabulous experiences. They're for everybody, for the staff, for the residents, for the volunteers, and even, you know, for the dogs. I know that everybody gets a lot out of those. And we also do sort of ad hoc, we do presentations. So we've certainly spoken at Origins, at the Bow River Seniors, and Golden Eagle View, sorry, it's a mouthful. And it could be sort of a success story. So there's a picture of Nikki and her dog, Blake. Blake was a resident of an early resident of our center who was adopted and became an avalanche rescue dog. So he's one of our, you know, one of our pride and joy. And he's continued to actually give back. He's one of the dogs we use as sort of a calming introduction. So he's never left us. And we do agility demonstrations, and we do talks on, you know, force-free training, interacting with rescue animals, you know, compassionate care, all those sorts of things, just sort of gearing it to the audience, but trying to just stay in people's minds and remind them who we are and what we're trying to do in the community. So this is just a few shots of us out in the community. Obviously, we love when we can go into a school with kittens or puppies. It makes us very popular. So, we even had someone visit with her ferret to one of the seniors facilities. So we're an equal opportunity animal organization. And so we've also worked on developing a training program at the center. So we've put a lot of work into developing programming where we're actually doing hands-on behavioral training, force-free behavioral training with owners and their dogs. So we were offering kind of a range of programs, sort of life skills to sort of, you know, issues that we see quite frequently with dogs in the community. So whether it's recall, walking well on a leash, and we continue to work one-on-one with adopters. So if adopters have adopted one of our animals that needs sort of continuing help, or along the way, we continue to work with them on a one-on-one basis. We also do a lot of work at the early stage of a canine life cycle. So not hard to get volunteers to help with puppies. So not a hardship post in our organization, but we do a lot of puppy socialization classes, and we've done those in partnership with Bow River Vet historically. Since COVID, we have actually moved those to our center just because we have that amazing 2-acre property where we can socially distance and manage the spacing a bit better. So we've hosted those ourselves. We've done seminars ad hoc. So we've hosted seminars on how to choose a puppy, try and get people on the right track to find a pet companion that's right for their lifestyle and their household. We've brought in experts to talk about different things. We had someone come in to talk about something called Tellington Touch, which is just a different way to connect with your animal. So we're always looking at ways to sort of bring, new ideas and relevant topics to the community and to our base of volunteers and staff.
McDowell, I just wanted to give you a time check. You're at 10 minutes.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay. Well, then I will skip over. We've always been out and around in town at the community at the Folk Festival, and we have Family Day open houses. Lots of great ways to connect. And we couldn't do any of this without our volunteer base of 170 volunteers. Of course, as I noted, we're pretty thinly staffed at the center. And so what we do and what we deliver is really thanks to the community who steps up, and we're an animal community. And so there's lots of great resources, and we're so grateful to them. And that's sort of where we are. I know Ed and I can certainly talk about sort of COVID, but we're happy to just turn it over to questions if that's.
Well, thanks very much for that overview, and it's always interesting to hear from the SPCA regarding what's happening there. And I'm a little curious. I'm sure other members of council are as well about the primary impact of the shelter as a result of COVID. There's some information in your printed report.
Yeah,
But-
Ed, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I can tell you from, certainly we were not unlike any other organization or group in town, including the town, when COVID hit. We had to try to determine what we were going to do and how we were going to react in a new COVID world. So as we mentioned, we shut the doors to our center and still managed to keep our staff, but we had to turn to go to an area where we'd already had a presence, but really try to be more involved from a social media perspective. So that's something that we tried to do, is have a greater presence and start doing training videos and things like that we can provide from a social media perspective. From a financial perspective, I think that's probably the question that lurks. How has that impacted us? I've got results for the first 7 months of the year. So as of the first 7 months of the year, at the end of July, our total revenues are down 17%. And in that, our donations are down 10%, primarily on the business side. So as the businesses have been hit harder in the Bow Valley, we've had less of those businesses making donations to us. Another big thing that's hurt us this year, of course, as everyone else, is our inability to have fundraising events, face-to-face fundraising events. So our revenue is down 51% in that particular area. What does that mean for the BVSPCA for the year? So this was the year that we had an operating budget of $303,000. We had a plan to break even this year, and that's not going to happen. As of July, we're showing a loss of $53,000. Typically, we run a campaign every year in the month of October, November, December. That's our annual fundraising campaign. We're actually meeting this week to determine what that's going to look like due to the fact of COVID, and we're not able to do face-to-face activities. So to sort of give you a bottom line on that, optimistically, we're looking at about a shortfall of about $65,000 this year, whereas we had planned to break even. So that really is the financial impact for us this year.
And how would you manage that? I mean, the services would have to be reduced.
We do have operating reserves. And so we will have to go into our operating reserves this year to cover off that shortfall. And as I said, we'll have to re-examine our budgeting plans for 2021 in this sort of post-COVID environment to determine what the face of I think the face of our organization, we want it to be the same, but our ability is going to be somewhat hampered, and it's going to be a little different going into 2021.
Mhm. Well, that is a common story, I suppose. I do have one question related to the report. Your written report notes that you had collaborated this year with WildSmart specifically. I'm curious if the SPCA has joined with WildSmart at Quarry Lake, the off-leash area there, to help manage the issues around off-leash dogs in those areas. Is that something that
It's certainly something we're open to. I know that in the past it was a joint presentation to, I think it was 2019 presentation to dog owners. And we have been at the dog parks before, but it's something that we, have talked about just sort of pursuing again, and just to be a joint presence. And we're, we'd love to collaborate with more of those organizations, and Fish and Wildlife as well, and just be part of that conversation at the parks. So if there's a way that you suggest we pursue that, I'm more than happy to, although we'll otherwise just pursue our contacts over WildSmart. Yeah.
We have talked about that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Mayor Borman. We would love to be in a greater partnership and a greater collaboration with not only Walsart, but with the town, in terms of having a presence at Quarry Lake, and as well as maybe even spending some time at each of the other individual parks, particularly in the spring when the activity gets up, where we could then provide educational information to the users of the park, and perhaps even put together some type of this weekend we're all going to get together and clean the park. We'll have a thing like that. It could be something that we could do on an annual basis in the spring, and then even in the fall, reminders in terms of winter's coming, and it's a different environment for animals and what they should do. So we'd love to have that collaboration with them.
Yeah, that's great. Certainly, the more involvement from community groups, the better. Our resources are stretched pretty thin. And certainly working together with WildSmart is probably your best approach, and it'd be great to see that continue.
Yeah.
Are there other questions from our other members of council? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation. It's nice to catch up with all the activities that you're involved with. I had a question for you regarding the relationships that you have with other organizations like the Calgary Humane Society, the Edmonton Humane Society. You mentioned in your report that you bring animals from other places around Alberta and rehome them in Canmore. Can you just let us know how you determine your capacity to do that, or how do you determine your capacity to bring animals from other agencies?
Well, if I could.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, we know that in a typical year, as I said, we average around 100, let's say 120 to 150 adoptions. That's really sort of been the number and the demand that's there in the Bow Valley, not only Canmore but in Banff as well. So we will have a certain capacity of animals that we can home in our center, and as the demand comes, as more adoptions take place, and we would reach out to some of the other organizations to see if they have any animals that are available. In the case of dogs, typically what happens is we would go to primarily places like Calgary or Cochrane that are closer to us, and talk to them about animals that they might have that either have some behavioral problems, where we could provide the care, quality of care to deal with some of those behavioral issues, or if they have some animals that have been there on a longer term basis. But it really is based on our capacity in the center and the demand from the public in the Bow Valley.
Do you ever send animals out of the Bow Valley to any of these other places?
We actually have not. I can only think of it within the last 4 years since I've been involved. We actually have only sent one cat, I believe, which we had gotten in. It was a mother cat and kittens, and they were somewhat feral. And despite all our ability or efforts to socialize the cat, we weren't able to. So we sent the cat to a barn cat program. But other than that, once we get an animal in our doors, it either gets adopted. I won't say it's there for life, but because we don't have any animals that are there that any extended period of time right now, but they usually get adopted out.
And of
Thank
course, our priorities, of course, to local surrenders. And also we need a facility for bylaw services with that partnership. But I think my understanding is, I mean, over time we have seen the surrenders decline from the Bow Valley, which is a great story actually. And so we're really, I think that kind of 10 to 15 is a typical number of surrenders we see. So yeah, the rest of the animals we're adopting through the center are coming from those other organizations.
Thank you.
Councillor Seeley, did you have a question?
Thanks, Mayor Borman. In the report, it talks about 16 animals surrendered last year, and you notice a steep increase so far this year. Do you know what is attributing to that increase?
I don't know if you have any more insight, and I don't know, ultimately what we'll see at the end of this year, and whether it's economy based, whether it's, we do, sometimes when people leave the valley, they feel they need to leave their pet as well. And so if it's sort of a lot more movement out of the valley, I don't know that we have a trend yet on that, but it's something we'll certainly look at this year and just try and understand that a bit better.
Okay.
It might be a bit premature, but I know of a few instances anyway where either the animal had some medical issues and the owners weren't able to meet those needs, and then there were a few where the residents were actually seniors and they were no longer able to care for the animals because they were moving into an assisted living situation. So. But we've seen a few more of those this year, but it might be a bit premature, but definitely the numbers are up for the first half year.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I see, Councillor McCallum, you have a question.
I do, and thank you for your presentation. I just was in reading the report that you provided for council. What is force-free behavioral training? I have a cat, but I don't have a dog.
Oh, I don't know if you want to speak to this. I can't apply it to cats, but it's really, so it's, or maybe that other way to say it is positive reinforcement. So
okay.
We sort of lure dogs into doing the right activity rather than sort of a no and disciplining approach. But I will say, I actually don't know how to apply it to cats. I don't know have the open paws approach to cats.
Yeah, my cats they rule the roost. So, thank you
Yeah,
very much.
no, I would echo what Lisa said. It's really positive reinforcement and just reinforcing and rewarding the positive behavior in dogs as opposed to punishing them. And I don't mean punishing in a very bad sense, but in terms of just the negative tone and things like that. Just as I said, dogs are creature of habit, and if they feel that they've done something and they're going to get a reward, then that's what they'll gravitate to if they know that. So that's really what that is.
Well, thank you both very much for being here and bringing council up to speed on what's happening at the Bow Valley SPCA. It's great to have a group of volunteers such as you have helping in the community with animals. We have a lot of animals, a lot of pets. And I know that you depend on a really large body of volunteers. And please extend to those volunteers the gratitude of the town for the work that they're doing. And continue to do the great work that you are as best possible under the COVID situations.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the town for your continued support of us. We really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
All right, thanks for being here. With that, I'll turn to the minutes of the Committee of Whole Tuesday, June the 16th. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the council updates, item E. Oh no, wait a sec. There's a staff report verbal. Item D1, Main Street closure. Who's presenting on that? Ms. Cottle.
Yes, it's Moit. Thank you. And actually, there are several others I'm hoping the municipal clerk's office can let in. So Ms. McClett, Ms. Vandervoot, and Mr. Asarte are all joining me on this presentation. I'm going to kick it off and then I'll turn it over to them. I'm first going to try to share my screen. How's that? Can you see that?
Almost.
Almost.
There we go. Now
Okay.
we can.
It's hard to know what almost means. Okay,
Yeah.
but there's a small group of us here from administration and the BIA to give council an update on the Main Street closure. And in thinking about and preparing for this presentation, I've really been thinking a lot about how much Main Street has transformed and changed this summer. And in thinking about those changes, it's made me think about how much it's transformed and changed over time. And so I did want to start, sorry, I'm not on my own, with just a bit of a land acknowledgement. So Main Street and the land in the town, as we know, has a history of visitation way beyond this summer. So Main Street in Kenmore is located within the Treaty 7 region of our province. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I do want to acknowledge and appreciate that Main Street is part of the traditional territories and home of the Iahari Nation, or the Stoney Nakoda Nation, the Bearspaw, Wesley, and Chiniki tribes, the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Region 3 Métis. As we think about the transformation of this space, I have found it sobering to stop and think about just how much it's transformed over time, and to remember that we are all visitors and treaty people as we think about Main Street. So with that, I do want to talk about the current state of Main Street and where things are headed. So we closed the Main Street as part of COVID and are beginning the process of wrapping up that closure. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the reopening details, any potential future closures and decision making. Ms. Vandervoot will be here on behalf of the BIA to share their perspective on the closure. Eleanor McClett is here to give an update on patio rebates and a summary of the learnings from the survey that she's done with Main Street and downtown businesses. And Mr. Asarte will talk to us about traffic impacts and some of the configurations that were put in place around the closure that will remain even after the road reopens. So we are planning to reopen Main Street to traffic on September 24th, which is next Thursday. So a little bit more than a week from now. We have done a survey of businesses, and there's been meetings between town departments and the BIA for some time now, but the most recent one just yesterday to check on the progress of the closure and to gauge people's sense of when the right time for reopening is. While the the closure has been successful overall at providing space for social distancing, we did want a reminder that the point was not vibrancy. It was really safety around social distancing. And while it became vibrant, we did not actively do much around creating it as a vibrant space. There was some funding provided, which was matched with the BIA through the, I'll forget the name of the grant, but I know Mr. Asarte knows, to make sure the space was inviting and welcoming. And overall, that has been successful. And while the downtown, especially the closed area, is still busy and well used, there is recognition that it's starting to slow down. Evenings are getting darker, temps are cooler, and so some of the sustained activity on the street just won't continue in the same way. So businesses have been notified to remove all their items by the end of the day, Wednesday, September 23rd, and that notification did go out yesterday. And that we will work to reopen the road. Our Streets and Roads team will get out sometime on the morning of Thursday, September 24th, and that the road will reopen to traffic. As part of the closure, there have been two, we call them pretty potties because they're not your typical porta potty, they're a bit nicer, that have been located in the downtown core, one at the PD3 bus location and one behind Union Hall. So the one behind Union Hall will be going out early next week, and then the one at PD3 will be transferred to the owner of that business. And they'll take full responsibility for maintaining that washroom and having it open, and they'll remove it when they decide to close their business for the season. We will also begin enforcement of A-frame signs and other things that we were not enforcing as part of this closure. So once the road reopens, all of those things will come back into play. There is lots of conversation about the future of potential additional closures. As we know, there are lots of unknowns ahead. There may be busy holiday shopping in December. We may have higher than usual visitation in town in the winter. The current reality of life with COVID may still exist and be in place next summer. And we may have all kinds of unknown impacts if there is a second wave. So what we're working to do right now is to plan and to gather learnings from this closure so that we can apply them in the future if there is a need for another type of closure or a similar closure. I did want to, Ms. Smithers regularly reminds us that the way we were able to manage this closure was to treat it as an event. So we did get clear it with our insurance and also get manage it as an event permit. So we were able to do things with signs and in the road right of way that we cannot normally do under our bylaws. So to just close the street is complicated. Treating it as an event allowed us some nuance and some room to be creative in ways that we wouldn't normally have. So on that, if there are to be future closures, there's some decision making that we'll need to consider. So this closure, as I mentioned, was due to COVID, and the decision was made by the ECC, the Emergency Coordination Center, during a state of local emergency. So an administrative team made the decision in conjunction with the BIA during the state of local emergency. Those conditions no longer exist. We're no longer in a state of local emergency, and we don't have an ECC. So if we're still in the position of COVID for next summer, for example, who decides about closing Main Street? Is that an administrative decision? Is that something that would come to council? There's all kinds of questions around process and timing, and we don't have any answers for that today, except to flag that as a go-ahead. These are conversations that admin will have and will bring to council for discussion at a further date. Mr. Barman.
Do you mind if we interrupt with questions?
Go for it.
So future closures due to COVID or in response to continuing COVID would be Town of Canmore decision, either admin or council or a combination. But as in the past, closures for special events would be a separate process and follow permitting process. Question mark?
There'd have to be, I'm not quite sure I follow your question. So there'd have to be a decision to close. And then once that decision is made, then we need to treat it as an event. Otherwise, bylaws have to be revised.
Right. But for argument's sake, if the BIA wanted to do, I don't know, a Christmas event on Main Street, that would follow the normal permit
Correct.
procedure as a
Yes.
special event. I'm just keeping those two separate.
Yes, right. If the BIA were to initiate the closure, then yes, they would follow an event process. You're correct. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And then basically, as I was saying, all these things are to be determined. We just recognize that they're questions going forward. And I did just want to clarify, there has been a lot of mostly positive feedback about the closure and some comment that it should just be permanent and put in place. And that is not currently being considered. That would very clearly be a council decision, not an admin decision. And as I mentioned, it would require bylaw changes. So it's not just as simple as deciding to close the road. There's nuance and complexity there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Vandervoot to speak a bit on behalf of the BIA.
Just before you get started, Ms. Vandervoort, on that last point, I'm not too sure how council or where council could initiate that conversation, but I have a feeling it would be a conversation council would like to have before next summer. So I'll just sort of file that away for future reference as can you?
Yeah, but as you are aware, we're in the process of beginning discussions around priorities and budget
Yep.
planning for next year. So that would be a good place for that conversation.
Right, you are. Sorry, Ms. Van der Verten. Mike is
Thank
yours.
you. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. So the BIA, I'm going to read most of this so I don't wander and I can keep on track and keep to my 5 minutes. The BIA has appreciated the support of the Town Council administration regarding the closure of the 2 blocks of Main Street. It showed how we can work together, pivot, be nimble, and create a project in a very short period of time that addressed the needs of COVID-19 with really minimal dollars as compared to other communities. At this time, I'd also like to take note and thank the town and council for the vibrancy grant, and also Travel Alberta, who helped contribute towards the closure. Our observation over the summer, it was overwhelmingly well received and allowed so many more people to enjoy the atmosphere of our downtown without worry about crowding on sidewalks and the exhaust and noise of traffic, as was mentioned to me many times. I would like to mention, though, when change takes place, there's always those who feel challenged by it. And yes, we did have some businesses who did not support the closure, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that. Generally, the majority supported it, and all worked hard, no matter what their personal feelings were, to make the welcomed. There were a number of learnings. Number one, parking, which is always raised as an issue, really wasn't an issue. It didn't really come up. Considering the number of people that frequented our community, this was something that we found very interesting. There was an incredible use of bikes and walking. I know all of you probably noticed it, and it was fun to see family groups of every age using bikes, locals and visitors alike. Our bike racks were always full. The idea to use the outside realm was really taken seriously by those that visited downtown. One of the issues that came up on occasion was access to handicap spots. But once we notified businesses and they were able to let their customers know where those spots had changed to, the issue was resolved. Also, I did encourage a number of our businesses who have parking in the back of their buildings to encourage the customers with limited accessibility to use those visitor spaces, as a lot of them didn't even know that they existed, and it often gave them better access to the business. Washrooms. This is always something that comes up when every year when I do surveys at the end of the summer. The pretty porta potties, as Ms. Cottle refers to them as, my understanding were well used according to our meeting yesterday. And they were much appreciated, as this has been a long-standing issue in our downtown and something to be explored in future years until the town master plan is completed. Our on-street expansion of patios and vendors was an excellent way to enlarge seating areas for restaurants, but how to manage that so it doesn't impact the businesses surrounding we need to have better guidelines and probably bylaw support if this was to be a regular seasonal event. Mask wearing. Well, it continues to be a point of contention with some. I don't think that's going to go away, though more often than not, most people are respectful. And by the way, those that aren't, it doesn't matter the age group. It can be older or younger. So that my businesses have noticed that it's very tiring at times, but a reality that they're all dealing with. It's been fun to observe how our businesses have been very innovative in how they pivoted to encourage hand sanitizing, sectioning of the restaurants and cash areas. Everything plexiglass type things, rolling things. It's been really fun to watch how people are doing that. We concerns going into the fall, of course. How are people going to feel about using sidewalks again? And only how are our restaurants in particular going to use their space and be successful? How is visitation in general going to be? So the next few months are going to be really interesting in how we as a community approach all these different issues. So I just wanted to again thank you all for your support and financial support, colleague support, etc., in making the closure a success this summer.
And thanks very much for the work that the BIA has done and the support, the great working relationship with the town. One thing I'm curious about your perspective on, and I heard about this and witnessed it myself on Main Street, was the issue of cycle separation from pedestrians and managing speeds of some cyclists, minority, but still. What was your personal perspective, or what kind of feedback have you heard from the businesses on Main Street?
There have been 2 or 3 that have commented to me and emailed me regarding it. I think it's a learning for everyone, and I would love to say there was a certain type of person that abused that or weren't kind to other people during busy times, but it was all ages at times, older and younger, who felt for whatever reason they had a right to not be respectful of the number of people around. So it's something that I'm sure that if we were to proceed with something like this again, it would be a conversation we would have with Andy and the town, how to process that. I hate to say no bikes at all, or that to walk them only, because there were times of day when it wasn't an issue at all. So part of our problem too is we didn't have like ambassadors or people there on a regular time when it was especially busy, that kind of had the authority to say, buddy, slow down, or like have some kind of way to manage that. So I think that is something else that we would need to consider going forward, especially during key periods of time. Our bylaw people were really busy doing Quarry Lake and other things. So they didn't, I don't think, have the opportunity to spend as much time downtown. But I'd hate to just cancel it totally, because I think it did add some ambience to the
Sure.
overall vibrancy of the downtown.
So what I'm hearing is in balance, the cycling component was quite positive. There
I
were
believe so.
issues.
There
Yeah.
were, as I said, I had it reported to me, and I know that I talked to the town 2 or 3 times about it. Like, was there something we could do? And we were trying to figure out what that could be on the short term, and decided at this point in time, it was a short season, and we would, just hopefully no one would get run over. We don't want to wait for that to happen, but I think that there are some things that we could put in place to sort of maybe help manage that in the future.
Great, thanks for your input on that. Ms. McLeod.
Good afternoon, Council and Mayor. So I wanted to present kind of the review. Beth and I agreed to join forces on surveying the businesses, because Beth has some requirements for her grant processes, and rather than going out twice, did that through our business visitation process, which was already scheduled to happen this year. And this year the focus was on Main Street and essentially the impact of the closure on the business community. So I just want to remind Council that the motion was earlier on, starting with patios, to rebate those who had already paid for the 2020 patio fees and waive any additional patio permits. So that those are the seasonal patios that you see generally on in various locations in town. So we had 9 rebates issued in the amount of $7,227, and another 3 additional patios, permanent patios, installed throughout the outside of the closure, where the permitting fees were waived. Additionally, the business visitation process, we had about 70 businesses that participated in the survey, 45 that we visited face-to-face, and the rest that we emailed directly and provided feedback. So for comparison, the majority, of course, being retail-based. We had food services, hospitality, arts and entertainment, finance, accounting, medical, so services, and then personal services. And under other, we had some, smaller groups of other industries that we have located. So professional services like accounting, like architecture and those types of elements. So overall, we had 70 respondents to the impact. As you can see, I just need to move my screen slightly so I can actually see my presentation. We had 35 businesses that said that the closure had a positive impact on their business. 13 said it had a negative impact on their businesses. 12 said it was hard to say. They didn't know whether the impact was COVID, whether the impact was the closure, or one way or the other. And 8 said little to no impact on their business. And so I wanted to provide council with a few of the comments just to show you the diversity.
Sorry to interrupt. On that last slide, could you, is there any way of breaking that down by sector? I mean, was it more positive, for instance, for the food businesses than retail, or was there any sense of that? It appeared to me that the food businesses were being very, very positively affected.
Yeah, so generally the feedback from restaurants has been that the closure, of course, has been very beneficial, but it's not all been inside the closure. It has not all been food services. I can provide a further breakdown. I did not do that for council presentation, but indeed I can target our filter a bit better to.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what businesses would have been negatively impacted by the closure, but maybe that's a separate conversation.
I think overall what we're seeing is that food and beverage, of course, recovered the fastest, and then the lower cost items, where we're seeing some businesses have less profit, is the higher cost items that are for sale. One business owner said, normally August is their best month of the year. And this year, although they had lots of sales in the store because the cost of their items is a bit higher, it didn't translate into sales. So they actually didn't see the normal positive sales that they would normally see in August. And that business, people said, we would like to, but we just can't right now, was the feedback from customers.
Yeah.
If I could just add to that, Mayor Bauman, people on the street, I don't think necessarily translates into people going into shops, especially for retail. So one of the concerns we heard before this closure was for retailers that when in other street closures in other communities, what happens is if the street is really vibrant, people stay on the street. And especially if they can eat and drink on the street, then they don't actually go into businesses to make purchases. So the fact that there are people downtown may or may not necessarily have translated, and some businesses may feel that it was negative because it kept people in the street instead of in the shop.
Sure, I appreciate that. Certainly, having operated a business in street for 35 years, I get that. But if there hadn't been a closure, arguably there would have been even less people coming to downtown Canmore. The closure was meant to increase the feeling of safety, which would increase the number of people. Anyways, we don't need to bog down on this. I'm just curious.
Actually, I'm going to take that to the next step of the conversation and just show you a little bit of a snippet of the comments that we received from business owners, from positive, positive, but it could be more vibrant to hard to say. Parking being identified as a challenge, big time negative was a comment, and that had more to do that they were outside of the blocks and couldn't set up a patio the way restaurants within the closure could do so. Negative because people are walking too far away from the store window. So again, not translating into sales, coming into the business. And others outside of the closure who said, absolutely great, because of this, people are parking closer to me, so I'm getting more business. And it helped build, so the mask bylaw build confidence. The vibe is super positive, and people more purposeful as when they're buying. And to, you know, again, would love to see it further down. So this is the diversity of feedback from business owners is all over the map. I just want to reiterate that the majority of feedback was positive overall. And even if it did not translate into sales, their customers loved it. And if their customers loved it, they as a business owner said, then we love it because that brings them back to our area. So the feeling of safety was definitely there and achieved what we set out for it to achieve by doing the closure. And one thing I will also note is that we received a significant number of emails from residents and visitors to the downtown that they really appreciated the closure and thought this was the best move by the town of Canmore. And I don't know about other departments, but I've never received emails from visitors or Canmore resident about positive elements of the downtown, but we received many of them this year. That
Great.
being said, we did ask in the business visitation survey, of course, how confident are you that your business will survive 2020? And we're happy to see that overall, the confidence level has increased slightly from previous surveys that we have done. About 3 said that they are not confident that they will survive. Sorry. Try not to sneeze in the microphone. And then 15 said that they are uncertain at this point of time, and that mainly has to do with some of the following. So the lack of available staffing to them. A number of people, when recalled, opted to stay on serve, which is hard then, of course, to find the staff in order to operate. So we have a number of businesses operating under reduced capacity because they don't have the staff to reopen nor the revenue to support the staff. The current revenue is not sustainable, so that makes them a bit uncertain. The cost of their lease or rent and others, and the majority of those comments is that there is a significant amount of fear around the second wave and the requirement to reclose businesses. And overarchingly, if their second wave hits, a big part of the feedback was that they would not survive. Would that be the next step if the government decides to do that again? So just to keep that in the back of mind. I wanted to share with council a few of the other questions just for your information. So we had 17.5% of businesses had increased staff hours, 60 had decreased staff hours, and 22% saw no difference in their operating hours. Biggest shift was towards seasonal full-time positions versus permanent full-time positions. So businesses were willing to rehire back people and generally in a full-time capacity, but only did so under seasonal contracts. So that's a big shift to what they saw pre-COVID, to what they're seeing during the reopening. And interesting as well is that 38% of businesses have staff with children at home and are concerned or uncertain about returning to school daycare. 84% of those businesses said that it has impacted their business operation. I spoke with one business owner who is working every weekend to accommodate his staff's childcare challenges. So as Sally already alluded to, we have lots of learnings in this process, things that in hindsight we could have done better, and things that we need to look at and filter as we move forward. And Astarte and I have already spoken that we would like to do a debrief also with the town of Banff staff to see what worked well on either end and where we can improve should we need to do so next year and pre-plan more effectively. Now we have some time to do so. For example, the need to manage, the ability to manage business encroaching. Think of the 6 meters from center in order to accommodate emergency vehicles. The need for a process of who and how to set up on Main Street, bikes and pedestrian and that mix, as you earlier alluded to, and the vibrancy element are reoccurring themes throughout the business survey that came back. So at this point, that is it for my part of the presentation. If you have any questions, happy to take those now.
I asked questions throughout your presentation. I guess just for continuity, I would ask you your perspective on the conversation that we haven't yet had about making this a regular closure. Do you have feedback on that or perspective that you want to share?
Yeah, so there's a number of considerations because of, I guess, where I grew up. I love the Main Street closure personally. I also recognize that for businesses, the pros and cons are very different. And in order to do it, we need to do it well. COVID is not going anywhere. So the reality is that the chances are currently pretty high that we would be looking at a similar scenario for 2021 at least. That would also give us the ability to collect better data, to actually compare year over year on the impact and what's working well and what's not, and how we tweak things, and then take that as our learnings for future years. And so that would be where I land.
I'm just really uncomfortable with this, with staff answering this question. With all due respect, we were very clear when we instituted this that this was not a trial of a permanent closure of Main Street. And so we very purposely did not do anything around vibrancy, and this was about a COVID response. So while I appreciate where you're going, Mayor Barrowman, I think that we need to keep these conversations separate. If we do an extension next year, that would need to be in relation to COVID. If council wants to have a conversation about a permanent closure of Main Street, I think that's a very different conversation we need to have in the community and with businesses. And I would prefer in this presentation that we keep that separate. We need direction from council and then we can do that work. But beginning to ask individual opinions, I just think it's out of the scope of this project. And we tried to be very clear that this was not a trial. This was a closure around a COVID response. And I think it's important that we keep it framed in that way. Sorry.
Okay.
I think we're moving on to Mr. Asarte anyway, if Ms. McClett is done.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'll be speaking to the transportation aspects. The plan for reintroducing vehicle traffic to Main Street is that we'll maintain all of the intersection changes we've made this past summer. The largest changes at Main and 8th and at 10th and 8th to the west of the town center, those were identified in the integrated transportation plan. Other changes like the town center-wide speed limit reduction, the four-way stop at 7th and 7th, and the scramble crosswalk at Main and 6th by the Stonewaters. Those were introduced to address a number of operational issues that we anticipated and that showed up. They helped calm traffic and they helped to improve safety around the town center. Those operational changes have worked well so far, and after some initial tweaking, we're also proposing to maintain those after opening and again continue to monitor them. The road network changes to accommodate the closure of those two west blocks of Main Street. It wasn't arbitrary that they were selected. They were part of and enabled by that planning work that was done back in 2018, which envisioned those two blocks in particular operating as an activity street in the future, and 10th Street and 7th Street continuing to operate as collector roads. And so the idea is that the nature of these roads is quite different. There's on a collector road, there's a vehicular function, there's a pedestrian function, there's a cycle function, there's a commercial function. They're not strictly arterials intended to just move cars, but it's a mix of purposes, and they are situated in the network in a way that's important that they continue to move cars. But those two central blocks of Main Street were identified as being different, and this not be thoroughfare, this not be a a collector road or an arterial road in the vehicular network. That it was successful, the network worked quite well. In general, there was good flow around the town center this year, despite fairly heavy traffic volumes. It's also a testament to the projects and initiatives that we've implemented in the years since the 2013 ITP, including transit and a number of capital projects that have enabled people to make different choices to choose to walk or use transit or to cycle. And we saw that in large numbers in the town core this year. So moving forward, the idea is to not revert strictly back to Main Street being the main thoroughfare across town, and really focusing on it as a local business access, a place where people continue to drive very slowly. An activity street is intended to be 20 kilometers an hour. This is people arriving at a destination. And to some extent, if you're arriving in your car, you're a guest in an area that's intended for pedestrians. So the behavior when you're driving in your car on Main Street should be quite different than when you're driving on a collector or an arterial road. So to help support the work that's been done to reestablish traffic patterns and to encourage this to still be an area where people feel comfortable walking and bicycling, there are a couple of things that we think are necessary, a couple of changes that are necessary. And I would love to show them to you as soon as my
While we're looking at this map,
computer.
so just to make sure I'm understanding, the Main Street will be reopened. Are you suggesting a reduced speed posted on those two blocks, or 20, would it continue to be 30 per hour all the way?
The idea would be that it's a slow zone. And so some signage to reinforce that, not necessarily a speed limit that's enforced, but I'll show some of the ideas that we have. Sorry.
I guess I'll wait for your other slide. I'm trying to figure out how it'll work at the 8th Street and 6th Avenue intersection going left, but maybe you'll clear that up for me.
The idea is what we're looking to do is shift perception. So as you're coming onto Main Street, it can't look like every other street. And that's the problem with North American street design is we design big roads for everywhere and they just get slightly bigger on freeways. So if you look at the design of Main Street, especially before there were curb extensions, it was a 15-meter wide road, and it looks just like every other 4-lane roadway. So we're looking to create some thresholding as you come onto Main Street to restrict it in a way that allows fire truck access, but discourages people from coming through with tour buses or delivery trucks or trades hauling trailers of material across town. And so that's accomplished using the precast elements, which we've used successfully elsewhere in town. This is a quick intervention that's relatively inexpensive. And on that, you can place planters and signage that creates a threshold at, in this case, it would be at the west end at the Wood, and in this case at the east end at Stonewaters. On the west end, you would see signage as you're approaching. This is intended to be low-level signage, people scale. We're trying to keep things looking human scale, not freeway signage. Main Street business access, please drive slowly. And one of the operational challenges that we'll have if we allow free flow traffic down Main Street is that westbound traffic will come to the intersection where we have the two-way yield. And that two-way yield configuration works really well at enabling traffic to move across town. We didn't see any of the backups we've seen in previous years, but that operates well when there's relatively low side street volume, volumes and reasonably high pedestrian volumes. And so trying to reintroduce at this intersection 8,000 or 10,000 vehicles per day wouldn't work well for that. So part of preventing big lineups of cars down Main Street is to have this particular movement coming westbound as right out only. And so if you're coming to Main Street from the east side of Main, you're looking for a parking spot, you don't find it, you turn right, you arrive immediately at a parking lot, or you can use the lanes to circle back and try to find a parking spot. So the intent is that people on using Main Street, these are people that are intending to arrive on Main Street. Anybody who's looking to turn left and be through traffic, they use 7th or 10th. And that's reinforced at the east end as well, where we again indicate please drive slowly and have directional indication for finding parking and for through traffic.
So at that intersection, the vehicle that's coming into the intersection, can it not drive straight through? It has to turn right?
They absolutely can. And this intersection will have no restrictions.
Okay.
We'll maintain the advanced left that's been there always, and then add in through right for the eastbound Main Street traffic.
Okay. So at the other end, the vehicle can only turn right at the Wood?
Correct. So if
But
you're looking to turn left, presumably you're through traffic, because if you're arriving at Main Street as a customer, then the likelihood is that you're coming from the east and you want to return to the east, so you would return via 10th Street. Or you're looking for additional parking and you would find that at Arts Place.
Right. So anybody trying to get to the Nordic Center or Three Sisters or anything from that part of town would turn left at the Stonewaters corner.
Continue to use the advanced left to use
Right.
the collector roads, or preferably use 10th Street.
Okay.
And so in closing, we've relied on previous planning to inform essentially every decision we've made around creating this accommodation. And we've seen good success in the operations and in reestablishing patterns that are consistent with that planning. We'd like to continue with that to allow for those patterns to continue to reestablish and for us to be able to create flow through those changes. And by doing that, we also have the ability to more easily, if it's required again in the future to make this change, we don't have to continue to switch intersections back and forth. So the modest costs that we did invest this year, we don't need to reinvest them. And and just in terms of space, and so the rationale for the closure was to create space for people. Our planning documents previously have identified that space is limited in the town center. So we are going to see a pretty significant change just in these 3 blocks of Main Street. Currently, with the closure to vehicle traffic, we have about 7,600 square meters of space. When we reintroduce cars, the public space drops back down to about 2,500 meters on that stretch. So it's about a 2/3 reduction in space available for people. So if there is a need in the future or desire in the future to reintroduce that, the changes that are in place will support it. With that, I'll open for questions.
And do you have anything to say or present in regards to the pedestrian crossings, particularly at 8th and 6th? What's the intent there?
At the Stonewaters intersection?
Yeah.
The scramble crosswalk will stay in place, and so it'll operate as it's operating now with a dedicated pedestrian phase. That was important operationally because what we were finding is that pedestrian traffic was blocking turn movements, which would then block through movements of cars. So by completely separating it out, there's a longer signal phasing cycle, but it addresses that operational challenge. And then it completely separates out pedestrian movements from vehicle movements. So that's always safer and desired. So operationally, we were heading towards it. This drove the change and an opportunity to observe how it worked. It functioned well, and so we're proposing to maintain it.
So it'll be a scramble crosswalk.
Correct.
Would there be lines painted to that effect or not necessary?
There are lines painted to that
Are
effect
there?
now.
And for the traffic that's northbound, I guess, on 6th, at this point, there's no right turn on the red light on the 8th. Would that stay or would they go back to right turn allowed on a red light?
That would stay. That's just operationally, that's important. One thing that we have looked at potentially, if this was to be required again, what we would consider is, and it's shown here, is potentially looking to realign the lines to allow for a dedicated right. So when their phase does come, a single right turning vehicle won't block through movements and vice versa. It'll provide a couple spaces worth of space for right turning traffic.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because that was a bit of a problem. Okay, are there questions from councillors? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you, Mr. Sarte. Could you go back a couple of screens where you showed the whole sort of street grid? So from what I understand correctly, if I'm heading west on Main Street towards 8th Ave, when I get to that corner, I won't have the ability to turn left. I will be able to turn right only. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then if I'm going east off of Riverview Place or the end of Main Street heading east, would I only be able to turn right there as well, or would I be able to turn left?
Left as well.
Okay, so it's just, that's gonna be interesting, eh?
Only right turning traffic. That's the only restriction. And again, it's primarily because with this being a through movement, if there's a small volume like there is off Riverview Place and River Road, you don't get any significant queuing. We observed it during busy times, and the delays were no more significant than, say, 9th Street or any of the other Rundle Crescent accesses, for example. But once you start to add higher volumes of vehicles trying to turn left, what would happen is that would block all through traffic, and including right turning traffic, and effectively act in the same way where people would be avoiding this corridor, but instead of avoiding it because they know they can't turn left, they'd be avoiding it because it's always jammed up with cars trying to turn left. So we want to preempt that, establish the patterns. If you're going left, use 7th or 10th, as opposed to trying to go down Main Street as a through vehicle.
Okay. And so the work that engineering did to set up the closure, the COVID closure on Main Street, how, if we were to be in this scenario again, how much time or lead did we require to do those changes to the lights and this and set up the infrastructure that we'd put out?
So it's about a week's notice at this point. We don't have to do any. In this case, we had to order materials, have them precast at the plant, Lafarge plant in Calgary. We had to not just line up the signal timing changes, but do the design and the tweaking afterwards. So all of that work's been done. We have the signal timings. It would just be a matter of having the technician or even our own staff go out and make those adjustments. So in under a week, the changes can be made.
Okay, so that's pretty responsive in my opinion. The other question I have is, have we had any success in, or is there success possible in sort of detouring people through their Google Maps programs in terms of through the web? So telling people where we want to go, encouraging people where they want to go if they've come here for the first time and they're looking at their Google Maps and their Google Maps is saying go left or go right as opposed to going down Main Street. Is that something that we can have influence on?
To some extent, we'll certainly give them information on the write out only. That should prevent maps from sending people who are looking to go through going down there. Also, Google uses feedback from drivers' actual speeds and their routes. And so in general, over time, we should see a shift of through traffic away from the areas where we've done speed reductions, where we have more congestion, and shift that to routes where we have more capacity.
Ooh. All right, that's good. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mayor Barman.
Are there other questions? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Asarte. If we're going to, no, I guess I can't really point at my screen because you can't see what I'm pointing at, right? If we're going to encourage people to use 7th or 10th, for instance, to go to the Nordic Center. So I found this summer trying to use 7th Street, turning left at 8th Avenue was very difficult. And because there's no traffic control at that point. So up till now, most people would go down Main Street, stop at the four-way stop, turn left to go to the Nordic Center, right? But I found it very difficult to turn left at 7th and 8th. So I think it's going to be a challenge to get people to use that as the left turning access to go up to the other side of the valley versus 10th Street, which now has four-way control there. So how are we going to message that to people? Because it's not equal. It's not equal to what we had on 8th on Main Street.
Yeah.
So
correct. So essentially what we've tried to message is more so to use 10th as opposed to 7th as a crosstown connector. 7th is available, but it's more of a local access. So if you're in downtown and you want to get to the Nordic Center, or you've already come onto Main Street and you want to get to the Nordic Center, then yes, use 7th. But through experience, and the majority of our people driving on our roads are either visitors who drive here on occasion and can get familiar with the streets, or are locals, predominantly locals. So the idea is you give preferential control on the route that you want people to drive. So 10th Street works well. 17th Street is also fully unencumbered going along Fairholme and 17th, which is the designated arterial. So preferentially, we'd like people to use those roads. And yes, people will have delay at 7th, but that to some extent that's intentional because we don't want people to use this necessarily as the shortcut. Use the designated roadways where we're trying to encourage the arterials and 10th Street collector, as opposed to this road, which has a slightly different nature. And as soon as you try to do any three-way stop control or anything like that, then we impede the arterial across the bridge and start backing up traffic. So really it's an experience thing. It's also in our wayfinding. Our wayfinding signage points preferentially to 10th. And hopefully through those algorithms with Google, those are the preferred routes based on the speed that people can get through. So we do expect there to be traffic delays turning left on 7th, and to some extent that's intentional. That's the preferred location for delays.
So are 7th Street and 10th Street both considered equivalents? Like, are they both arterials?
They're both considered collectors.
Or collectors?
8th Avenue and Fairholme and 17th, that's designated as the arterial road. And the truck route. 7th is collector, 10th is collector. But when you look at the nature of the streets, preferentially, we would get overloaded on 7th because this is the shortest route. So if we want to balance traffic on those two routes and not have traffic prioritizing 7th Street, we need reasonable flow on 10th, good flow on the arterial, And though they're the same classification, more people would use this, and that's not what we want. We want there to be a balance.
The school buses would all be going through that 7th Street area to get to North.
Yeah, they use 5th Ave to get to the bus loop in the back, and they use a number of different routes. But yeah, they would likely use 7th Street, 6th Ave, 7th. I think they use a number of routes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I can say on a personal level, I've been using 10th Street pretty much the whole summer, and it's a breeze. I'm often coming from across the valley and trying to get across the river. It's so easy and refreshing to go to the 4-way stop at 8th Avenue because there's hardly ever a wait there, more than 1 or 2 vehicles. And then it's free flow all the way along 8th. So I think local drivers, if they haven't got that figured out yet, they'll figure it out pretty quick. I wouldn't want to be trying to turn left on 8th Avenue from 7th Street because it can take forever. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Mr. Sorte, traffic traveling south on 6th Avenue turning left onto Main Street. Some of the feedback I heard was it'd be nice to have a quick advance there. Any thoughts on that?
We haven't looked at that. Anytime you add additional phases, it's going to start to detract from all the other movements. That isn't one of the primary movements we're trying to encourage. The southbound 6th Ave traffic presumably is local to the town center, and if there's a slight delay getting out from that movement, that's, I think, something we can live with. If you did an advance left on there, you're going to be doing it at the expense of the predominant movement, which is 6th Ave northbound right turn, with some small amount of 6th Ave through that's looking to get up to Rec Center or whatever the case is. So it would reduce the level of service on the collector movements in favor of really what's a local movement. And so we can live with a small amount of delay here. And from what I observed, the delay may be annoying, but it doesn't result in excessively long queues, even during peak times. I drove that on at 4 o'clock on a Saturday of the long weekend, and the queues were relatively small. Though I understand it can be a delay and a bit of an annoying movement.
Yeah, that's been my observation too. A little bit annoying, but not out of this world. So reasonable.
The tricky part with that area is when you're going north on 6th, wanting to turn right on 10th to get out of downtown, there can be a long line of traffic coming eastbound on 10th. And it can take a long time to get your turn there on 10th up towards the fire hall.
Yeah, and this is another intersection where we've had calls to put in 4-way stops and traffic control. There's a balance with all of it, and it's a potential candidate for that. However, we wanted to, if this was all stop control, so stop, 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 then the preferential route, and this was through the preferential route, becomes 7th, and then we've got heavy congestion on Main Street, and then we get backups towards Railway Avenue. So we have to pick and choose to some extent where we're going to encourage delay. I know some South Canmore traffic comes up to use that to access Golf Course Rec Center. We had a discussion in a meeting the other day. You use 7th and then get onto the arterial. Don't come through. This is actually another town center local road. It's not designated as a collector. So the intent isn't for this to be a through movement. So we are living with at present the delay here. The homes here can use 7th and the 4-way stop. We accept that there's going to be delay coming off this leg of 6th Ave, both to access Main and 10th. The idea being that allows 10th Street to be a preferential route over shortcutting on Main or shortcutting on 7th Street across the town center.
Yeah, I'd certainly follow the logic. at the beginning of the summer, when we were first putting these changes in place and you were trying variations, there had been quite a few emails directed my way, at least in council's way, I think, from residents in 7th Street and in other parts of South Canmore that were frustrated by the change to the traffic flow in that area. But either people have adjusted or they got tired of writing me, I don't know, but I haven't seen too many emails in the last month or 6 weeks to the same effect. And I know you've been engaged with a number of residents from that area through the summer. What's your sense of the response at this time to after the tweaks you've put in place over the summer?
The initial response, I think, was seeing that higher traffic flow coming on to 7th. After that, in response to the feedback from residents, we installed the 4-way stop, and we implemented the 30-kilometer speed limit, so that and added signage along 7th Street so that this was traffic calmed. I think the effect was, one, to take the traffic that is on 7th Street and calm it, making it less noticeable and less intrusive for residents along there. And then it also had the other effect where the changes, and we also changed this to the 2-way yield around the same time. Those changes encourage people to use 10th and 17th. And so likely there was a decrease of traffic that came with the traffic calming along there, and whatever traffic remained was less impactful. That said, there's still more that could be done on 7th Street to change the nature. It's quite a wide road, but for the time being, it seems that that's addressed the acute concerns.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions for Mr. Asarte? Seeing none, thanks for being here to present. And I have no doubt that Ms. Cottle has some final comments.
Nope, that's it. Unless there's other questions from council, that was our update.
Great. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. So a question I have, and I guess, and you may not have an answer to this, and it might be something that you're mulling through as we progress through the fall.
Who's this directed to?
Administration.
Okay.
Is there, it kind of leads to the questions of how, when I was asking Mr. Sarte about how long it took to flip the street and so on. Well, do you think that there's going to be some sort of, if we need to do this again for businesses, whether it be in the summer months or in the winter? Sometimes it feels like just 1 month of summer, though, doesn't it? The summer month. Sorry. Is there going to be some sort of trigger? Is that what we're going to try to come up with? Is it going to mean Ms. Vandervoort gets a loud response from her membership saying we need to do this again because we're not able to serve our customers in a socially distant way, or the way things are? Like, how is that going to progress moving forward, or is that still a work in progress?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, something we have talked a good bit about, but not really put any parameters around yet. And even when we were initially talking about this closure, you all may remember that the reopening came sort of fairly quickly. With 2 days notice, we learned we were moving to stage 2 and that businesses could reopen. And there was a bit of we'd been talking in the background that we needed to start to think about Main Street and we were re-welcoming visitors, and then suddenly they were here. And there was a potential rush to try to get the road closed in time for the May long weekend. And in the end, in consultation with the BIA, we did not do that because we really wanted the time to be able to think things through and put things in place and make sure that our departments like engineering and streets and roads and the BIA had time to prepare and do things thoughtfully. And then we didn't come up with criteria, although we talked about it for taking the road out. It's more been just about a feel, engaging feedback and input about things slowing down. So that's a long way of saying, no, those criteria don't exist yet, but it's a good question and the kind of thing that we need to, as both Ms. McClett and Mr. Asarte were talking about learnings and next steps. That's the kind of thing we want to do in a debrief so that those triggers are more easily identified. I think one of the challenges is that, and some of the feedback indicated this, we're only talking about 2 blocks of Main Street. And for example, we encourage people to park at Elevation Place and walk downtown. The majority of your walk would be in a tighter area than the 2-block closure of Main Street, right? And in businesses on other streets, on the side streets or on 10th, that didn't have the road closure. So we need to have a bit more of a holistic picture. While it's been good for creating public space in those 2 blocks, even when town is busy, people still have to navigate in spaces where there isn't as much room. So that's all part of our conversations going forward.
Thank you. And are there any discussions or considerations, should we look at a partial closure of Main Street, say if we were to remove the on-street parking on Main Street itself or on weekends or something like that, to widen that sidewalk more, but allow vehicles still? Is that at all a possibility or a consideration?
We have looked at that, but we just don't have the resources to open and close that every weekend. It's time, it takes a good bit of time for our streets and road team. It's fairly labor intensive. And especially when there's other priorities happening, like snow clearing, like street sweeping, or other incidents. There was we required a lot of sign moving from them this year around COVID. So that really takes away from other workload. And so their feeling is they don't currently have the resources to be able to put that up and take that down every weekend.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Vandervoort, if I have a question for you. I noticed in my inbox came the BIA bulletin that I get every week. And I hear, as I've told you before, your wisdom and leadership coming through that bulletin when it comes to me every week. So I thank you for that. I noticed that there were 25 businesses that argued valiantly to keep Main Street closed for a bit longer. Can you speak to that at all? Was it specific to the feel of Main Street? Was it specific to the survival of their business? Was it based on their own interests or general interests, or is it just a mix of all of that?
It's probably a mix of all of that. And it was very grassroots. They did it on their own and and it was probably very similar to the number of businesses that Ms. McClett had in her that were positive, very positive about the opening or the closure of Main Street. So a whole bunch of things as Mrs. Caudill has and Mr. Asarte and Ms. McClett said, were taken into consideration when we met yesterday. The idea was to keep it open until after Thanksgiving, or keep it closed until after Thanksgiving.
Right.
So, I mean, we discussed that, and the thing is that as much as me personally maybe want to have that, we have to take in consideration a whole bunch of other things that are going on in the community in order to accommodate.
Perfect. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to thank your organization for their ingenuity and their creativity, because they certainly stepped up on Main Street. It was a beautiful thing to see, in spite of all the difficulties we're experiencing as a society right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. But I must say, I had a lot of backroom help within the town. They had to, and I was listening to a podcast earlier today where a lot of departments in a lot of municipalities across North America had to quickly change, overlook bylaws, or quietly look around bylaws in order to make these kinds of things happen. And I really want to thank the town of Canmore and the administration for doing that during this period of time.
Perfect, thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of council for any of the presenters? Seeing none, thank you all very much for being here today. That's really been interesting and very helpful overview of the experience we've had this summer with Main Street. So thanks for bringing that report. This time I'll move on to item E1, Councillor Updates, and throw the floor open for questions from councillors. A question for Councillor Seeley regarding your report on TCK board activity meeting highlights. And the last board meeting I was a bit late for, and I missed the first part, and you reporting on it there in regards to June remittance and then the refusal to process LMOs. Can you just flesh that out a little bit for me and for council, what the situation?
Well, the June remittance members are paid up, most members, so that's going well. And the refusal to process LMOs are in Banff and Jasper, and they're not sure in Canmore if that's happening, so they were going to check into that.
So right now, somebody's refusing to process the LMOs from Canmore?
No. That was in Banff and Jasper, but they worked through that.
So what does it mean Canmore is looking into it?
Canmore is looking into if it's a problem here in Canmore. They weren't sure.
Oh, okay. So at the board meeting, there was no issue identified with processing LMOs here?
No, and they were checking it. So I don't know if it's a problem or not, but that's something that'll be clarified at this week's meeting, I would imagine.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor McCallum?
Can I ask what an LMO is?
Labor market, it's a form.
Opinion. Labor market opinion. Okay, I know what that is. Now, thank you.
No, I think it means something else. However, it's foreign workers.
Which is a labor market opinion. Thank you.
Is it okay?
Not a question, but just a comment on Councillor McCallum's note that construction has finally mobilized at the lodge. That's best news I've seen in a very long time. It's so nice to have that project in the ground. We've been talking about that since before I was the mayor, I think. I know it, we have been. So that's good news.
I just want to apologize for the atrociousness of my spelling in my report. I'm just
I
looking
was shocked.
It's awful. Well, I'm embarrassed because I are a graduate. So yeah, I just like, whoa, sorry.
Yeah, I was shocked. And also in your report, Councillor McCallum, on the Transit Services Commission, you note that the commission has been able to set people's expectations around bicycle space. And I assume you mean set realistic expectations so that people aren't overwhelming the buses with bicycles.
Yeah, we pretty much made it clear through the messaging in the summertime that if you're riding the Legacy Trail with your bicycle, you should probably expect to ride back because you might have to wait a run or two on the regional to be able to get back. We're just really trying to preserve those spots for essential workers that are going back and forth through the community or that require that bicycle safe space for work as opposed to for pleasure. The other thing I will add that I thought was kind of interesting that I didn't have time to put in, our reports are generally due like 3 days before our transit commission meeting. So in the top bullet point, we talk about the COVID pandemic effect on transit operations and that there's some money that's being doled out to municipalities, and CUTA, which is the Canadian Union of Transportation Association, has been fighting hard that allocation be based on ridership levels. It turns out that Rome in general has the 6th highest ridership in the entire province of Alberta. So it's kind of interesting based on all these other much larger municipalities that are around us that we have such strong ridership. And that assistance could really shore us up for the next year in our budget. So it's pretty important that we get it.
Great, thank you. Any other questions amongst councillors for each other's reports? Seeing none, I'll move on to item F1, service area reports. Just an observation, I guess, on the CAO's report around the current assessment model review process undertaken by the province regarding the assessment model for oil and gas properties, which it's noted is intended to enhance industry competitiveness, but I think it's really important for municipalities to keep pointing out to our residents that there's a direct negative impact to municipal taxpayers as a result. So in efforts to improve the situation for oil industry, there's going to be a cost to taxpayers across all municipalities. So I just think that's important to Ms. DeSoto.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Borman. And I would just like to highlight that no final decision has yet been made by the province. They are looking at 4 models. With strong indication they will go with one of the assessment review models, but they have yet to make a decision. And so certainly any advocacy on behalf of the community or the ratepayers that council wishes to do with our MLA or the province in general, you can certainly still have time to do that.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see where they land on that. But it will, I think, influence our discussions on next year's budget pretty directly. Councillor McCallum.
I just have a question about, are we on B in municipal services yet?
Sure.
Perfect. Big Fun Summer Camps wound up their operating season on August 28th. Registration exceeded 86% of capacity. I don't know, how would we be able to host more kids than we have capacity for, or am I misunderstanding the statement?
Yeah, I think what they're saying is out of 100% capacity, it was over 86. So we didn't,
Okay.
Not every space was taken, close to 86% of the available spaces were taken. That's
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Ms. DeSoto, on your report, item E around the negotiations for the new rec services agreement, and knowing that in approximately 2 weeks, we're past the discussion stage and heading for a dispute resolution. Is there any change to that situation?
Yes, we just heard from the MD last week. The 2 finance managers have met and have reviewed the models and cost allocation methodology, and the CAO from the MD of Bighorn has requested a meeting this week with myself and with Chelsea Richardson, our manager of finance, as well, to review some potential ways forward. I guess I'll leave it at that. We haven't really seen what they're proposing, but they are willing to come back to the table.
Okay, well, that's positive news. Thank you.
Yes.
Looking for questions from councillors. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. So I'm noting that there were quite a few tickets issued. 219 tickets and 53 warnings. Were those specific to Quarry Park or just all of the tickets issued?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where you are.
I apologize. Protective Services.
B4.
4B.
4B.
4.
B4 under municipal services.
Yeah. Community peace officers have focused much of their time addressing concerns at Quarry Lake Park. And then there's a summary of challenges, which is, and then right underneath it, it says 219 tickets and 53 warnings have been issued related to parking offenses, illegal consumption of alcohol and cannabis, etc. I was wondering if there's specific.
Yes, the majority of those are at Quarry Lake. Yes, not all, but the overwhelming majority. Yes.
And has Tony Bloom settled on the name of his project?
I have not heard.
Okay, on tender hooks.
There's an
And
unveiling scheduled, I think,
I
before
know.
the end of the month, so he'll have to
it's
let us know.
bated breath. And then I noticed that the Bill 32 has some effect on labor, on our labor relations code. And I'm wondering if there's any big impacts that the town needs to be aware of for that, Ms. Rogers.
You're muted, Therese.
1A, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. There were a number of changes and the HR team is working through what those changes are. There are things like how overtime is calculated and how banked overtime can occur. And then there were also some changes in the labor relations portion of the code affecting unionization and union groups. There's nothing substantial. Well, that's not entirely true. There are some significant changes. In essence, many of the changes that the NDP put in place when they were in government have now been reversed around the Employment Standards Code. So we're just working through item by item, and the province is planning between August 15th and November 1st to have some information sessions. Those have yet to begin, so we'll get more information as time goes on.
Thank you.
I have a question as well from Ms. Rogers under Corporate Services, Human Resources. Bullet point D, it notes operational staff have been recalled to work and oriented to new procedures and safety protocols at the rec facilities. Do you have a comparison between pre-COVID and this point? How, like a percentage of what originally, how many staff used to be employed and what percent of that are now employed? Do you know what I mean? I mean, are we running at 50% of what it used to take, or are we running at 80% of staff from what it used to take?
I do not have that. I can certainly work with Mr. Yonker to figure that out and we can respond back to you.
Just curious, thank you.
Yeah, we are scheduling based on operational needs, so based on our business volumes and also based on our hours of operation, and then adjusting staffing accordingly, but I don't know what the percentage is, I'm sorry.
Okay, moving forward, any questions on D, municipal infrastructure? No questions?
Sorry,
Councillor McCallum?
I didn't realize my mic was on, sorry. Oops. Item 3B, Canmore Rec Center Lifecycle Maintenance Project. I note that the contractor has been relinquished of its responsibility to complete the exterior works. So is that like the general contractor?
Yes.
Okay. And then I note that we have the largest solar installation in the Bow Valley now.
Yeah, bragging rights there, huh? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Under 2 engineering services, 2A, the TIP 20 Transportation and Utility Improvement 2020. That is the intersection at Railway Avenue, is that correct? In Bow Valley Trail?
Yes, that's part of it. It also includes some of the resurfacing going up Benchlands and Palliser as well. So that general area that includes.
Okay, so I note that the deep utility work is completed. And how long is it going to take to have the paving done over that?
I believe they were saying, as it says in the report, the majority of it will be done in 2020. So I would expect in the next few months. I can certainly check with engineering and get a more definite answer than that and send it to council, share it with council.
So once the deep utility work was completed, what is still happening at that intersection? Just realigning roadways, or because there's still a fair bit of work going on there, right?
Yeah, so my understanding is there is still some utility work being completed there. And then in addition, they are doing, they're installing the bike and pedestrian pathways. As you know, those are going to be bigger than just the sidewalks that were in place there. So they're putting those in place. I think there's some work with shallow utilities related to that and the placement of it. And then obviously just when that's all done, the road subsurface and paving as well.
So they have to wait till all those tie-ins are complete to do the final paving?
I can't really speculate as to the staging of it, as that's not my area of expertise, but yeah, it's there's a lot of moving parts in a project that big. So yeah.
So there's a lot of things that have to come together because just it seems that there's a lot of work at that corner, but there's a lot of other work around that corner that has to be completed as well.
Yeah. And it definitely has been a very challenging project given the water table, particularly this past summer. So there's a lot of complexity to that project to begin with. And then just, I think part of what we're seeing too is in combining some of those capital projects, we have realized some efficiencies in the scheduling and in the cost of them. But when we take it as a whole, it is a much bigger project than just an isolated resurfacing project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And on that project, I know there's been rumors out there in Facebook land that the project has gone way over budget. My understanding is that's not true, that the budget is still, the project is still on budget. Otherwise, I expect we would have seen it been before council looking for approval on increased budget, which hasn't happened.
Yeah, so as I said, the work there was more intensive than expected, and there is some work remaining. So we are monitoring that situation closely. But no, we're not in a position where we'd be coming back to council to change budget or scope on that because it's still tracking.
Great, thank you. I'm moving on to Public Works. I have a question on the solid waste services, just about the explosion at the recycling, materials recycling facility. So there must be, this was attributed to the small propane gas bottles in the recycling or in the waste. That must happen fairly regularly. People toss their canisters into the trash or recycling or something. But I've never heard of it resulting in explosion. Normally, how would those canisters would be plucked out in the sort line or with that magnet that's on the sort line? How would they normally be handled?
That is a very good question. I would assume it would be through the sort line and that magnet conveyor as you've referenced. I can say, rather than speculate on how it would be handled, I would say a hazard ID is underway right now to identify why it happened this time and then put practices and protocols in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. Well, prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I'm just surprised. If it happened once, I'm surprised it hadn't happened before. So yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what comes of that. Also, it was interesting and reassuring to read in the Solid Waste Services report the fact that a number of speeding complaints that had been leveled at solid waste collection vehicles were shown through GPS data to be untrue, that our trucks are driving the speed limit. That's certainly reassuring. One of the benefits of having installed GPS on all those trucks. And just a question under sustainability, item E under, well, that's in Public Works area. The wildlife fencing at Centennial Park. So it notes that the contractor is making final adjustments to the self-closing gates. And I had heard the rumor that there were elk inside the gates last week. And I'm not sure if if there were gates in place or not. Does anybody know what happened last week with that situation?
I have not heard anything on that. I can certainly follow up with Public Works and get back to council on that. I would note that, as indicated in the report, the contractor is addressing some deficiencies and adjustments on those self-closing gates. So it would suggest to me that the gate is not yet up and fully functional because of those deficiencies.
Yeah, it'd be good to have the report on that, just because.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big project in community scale to fence that park, and it'd be really great to know that the fencing works as intended.
Absolutely, I will follow up and get an answer back to council.
Super. Any other questions from councillors for the service area reports? Seeing none. Is there any questions in regards to attachment 1, the assessment model review, wells and pipelines? Seeing none, moving on to the council resolution action list. I have 1 or 2 questions.
I had a question, sorry, about the assessment model review. Sorry, Your Worship.
Callum, go ahead.
And I note here that that's really quite heavy industry included as the stakeholders next to AUMA and RMA. Ms. DeSoto, is there, outside of the Property Taxpayers Association, is this what it looks like for stakeholder involvement? Are any of the larger cities being brought into the conversation outside of AUMA, because the financial impact to them is going to be tremendous?
No, my understanding is that the stakeholder consultation was very much with industry and on the industry side, and then only just recently have the 2 municipal associations, RMA and AUMA, been invited to the table. While you're correct, I think there will be some significant impact to the large urban centers. The most direct impact
Is the regional municipalities, rurals.
Yeah, as I said, as the rural municipalities lose assessment and the education taxes get distributed across the province based on assessment, that means the percent share of assessments in urbans goes up. And so our share, and just like City of Calgary and City of Edmonton, the share of the education tax assessment is expected to go up unless the province reduces their overall assessment, because they are losing that tax base as well. So it's hard to know how they're going to approach that. So the urbans have the indirect impact. The lion's share of the direct impact is to the
rurals.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
But you noted that there hadn't been the decision made yet as to which scenario would move forward.
Correct.
We'll stay tuned, I guess. If there's nothing else on that report or attachment, just a couple of questions on the council resolution action list. In looking at the list, it used to be, I think, that the motion number was on the chart, which indicated the date that the motion was put on the table. And I remember a discussion about this at agenda review or someplace. Did we intentionally drop the motion numbers on the resolution action list?
No, Mayor Borman, I think that could just be that the column was is unintentionally hidden.
Sure. Okay.
So we can certainly put that back on there.
Great.
Because I agree, it would be hard to reference the meeting.
Yeah.
Meeting came, yeah.
Yeah. The second resolution in the chart, servicing, grading, and building foundation work for multifamily rental, et cetera, et cetera. Action status, the Lower Silvertip Wildlife Corridor review is nearing completion. We expect to be able to present the findings to council by Q3 2020, which is now. So is that something that you're going to be able to present this quarter?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
So if I can jump in there, it will be coming in fourth quarter. I just haven't had a chance to update that action status yet. Third quarter is the end of September. We won't be in front of council by then.
Right. So soon. That's
Yeah, definitely.
great. Thanks. And the next one down around proposed off-leash dog park. The direction was to bring the the open space and trail plan to council for review. That was pre-COVID, that direction. I'm assuming that that work hasn't been done and is going to be difficult to do. The goal was having something in the council before the end of this year. But is that likely at this point?
No, that's not likely. I will need to revisit the timing on that with the planning department, and some of that is going to be influenced by the upcoming business plan and budget discussions as well.
Yeah.
So I can't put a date on that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the process, so that I'm not sure if we need to bring this motion back for revision and recognize that the work can't be done by in this year. And we can talk about that later, Ms. DeSoto.
Yeah, certainly I think we can update the action status. And that is something that we will do before the next committee of the whole. I don't see that there's a need to update the resolution unless there was, after a discussion on budget and business plan and resourcing priorities, determined that council no longer needs that update to that plan, then we could rescind that motion. But if you still want it tracked and brought back to an update, then
the motion was for council to be able to review the plan and yeah. So I recall the discussion some time ago at council. And there was certainly interest in reviewing the open space and trail plan at that time. I mean, the urgency has been reduced by other factors, but the motion still stands that council should be reviewing the plan, or at least rescinding the motion or something.
okay.
We can talk. And I recall we also had a conversation recently about the review of cannabis consumption. And I know that's not been possible for Mr. Burt. It was supposed to have been, 2 years was the timeline. We wanted to have a report back to council by October 2020. And I'm certain that work hasn't been done. And I don't know when we'll be able to do it, but that's still a direction from council, is to have a review completed. And
Yep, and Mr. Burt's aware of that. He also, the president of CHLA has also been unavailable. So in order to complete that work, we really need to be able to have that consultation. So it's still in the work plan and we will get it to council as soon as we can. It just won't be October.
great, yeah, I just wanted to flag that it's still, and I understand why it hadn't been done, of course.
Yeah.
There's a couple of resolutions towards the end of the list that, at least one that I guess could be dropped from the resolution action list. Now the one around the Canmore Community Monitoring Report. So,
No, I don't see that one being dropped yet. I think that the Canmore Kananaskis tourism strategy one would be dropped after this meeting. The
Yeah.
one for ECDev, we still need to do some work and have a workshop with council, so that will be forthcoming. And then once that happens, but the community monitoring report isn't resolved yet.
right, I see admin is creating a new way forward and, okay, yeah, right you are. Okay, Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I was wondering what our next steps are with regards to the refund from Innovate Canmore.
Yeah, so since this update was written, we have heard back from Mr. McClure of Innovate Canmore, and we reminded him that repayment plan was an option, not just payment in full. So he indicated he was going to look into that. I haven't heard anything further. Ms. Rogers might know more about what timing and steps are for other processes if we don't receive those funds back.
He does have another option. He can actually just provide the economic impact statement. Isn't that the other alternative option?
It is, although it's our understanding from the way that report was moving that it was really going to be about an interest in a partnership with the town, and it sounds like maybe there's less interest in that partnership. So I don't know if that economic impact study, I don't know where they're at with the study, or if it's still been, the work being done on it is relevant for how it was initially framed. I have also asked about that, but have not heard.
Okay, thank you.
And I can add that our finance team has connected with Mr. McClure to discuss a payment plan. And if payment is not received with the payment plan, as with any other outstanding debt, we would move to collections. We're not at that stage yet.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you were saying at the end there. What was that?
If payment is not received following the setup of a payment plan, we would move to collections as we would with any other outstanding debt, but we're not yet at that stage.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, discussion on the resolution action list? Seeing none, I believe that brings us to the end of the meeting. I'll move that committee of whole be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? When we're adjourned.